Thank you for coming back to the channel. And I suppose maybe there's women on here looking too, but right now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty, as Nacho Libre would say. But it's time to talk about roles. I want to talk about the different roles within marriage specifically, and want to look at what does God require of us husbands. We'll look at the wives' roles too, potentially, but obviously this is a channel really focused on the men and want the men to be focused on themselves and what they need to be doing to, or we need to be doing to improve and be more like Christ. So what does God require of you as a husband? I would say husband and father, but I want to focus on fatherhood separately. And we have plenty of general commands of how we are to behave and act. And if we really acted that way, I don't think we would need specific commands in marriage, right? I mean, if we obeyed all the other commands that God has for us and not be selfish, don't complain, all these kinds of things, we wouldn't need specific rules or commands regarding marriage. But we're dumb sinners. So God has given us direct commands in regards to marriage and the roles in marriage. And I want to focus on those right now rather than the general things, right? There's a lot of general things. Don't be selfish, be kind, be patient, the fruit of the Spirit, all kinds of things. But right now I want to focus specifically on the roles that God has given us in the commands within marriage. So let's get into it here. One of the most well-known passages is in Ephesians chapter 5. And this is, I'll say, one of the often negatively quoted passages where it says, wives, submit to your husbands. Okay? Well, we're not going to get into that part right now. And I will say, ultimately, though, it's hard for us, it's hard to really jump into verse 22, where he starts talking about the marriage roles, without addressing verse 1 of chapter 5. And chapter 5, verse 1 says, therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children. Okay, verse 2, and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. And so be imitators of God and love as Christ has loved you. And then right into verse 3, but immorality and impurity and greed must not even be named among you. And he goes on into the other things. And so he goes into these things like just how we're supposed to act. So as we roll then into verse 22, we see where it says, wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. Meaning when you submit yourself to your husband, it's, or you should be submitting them in the same way that you submit to God. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. Wives are to submit not because, men are awesome or amazing or anything like that at all. And it's not because women are inferior. It does say, and it refers to women in 1 Peter as being the weaker vessel. And I think even my own wife would say, yes, I'm stronger than she is, but most importantly, has nothing to do with that. And it has nothing, that doesn't mean it's a put down. It's not like, oh, they're weaker or less than. No. Wives are to submit because the husband is the head, just as Christ is the head of the church. Why? Because God established it that way. Why can you only make one forward pass why can you only make forward passes from behind the line of scrimmage in football? Because it's the rule. They set up the rule that way, right? Why can't you have full contact in basketball? I mean, why can't you just push them over? Because it's a rule. They established it. This has nothing to do with value of an individual. One of the ways that I like to liken this is, well, I'll say I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but so the first big role for husbands is we're leaders. And now you may not have the gift of leadership. You may not be a great leader at work or at church or whatever, but you are the leader of your home. And you're the one who has the final say. So let's flesh this out a little bit. And if you think about business, um, in your business, wherever you may work, you have assistant managers, you have general managers, you have regional managers, um, and if you're Dwight Schrute, you're an assistant to the regional manager, right? Um, but have you ever worked somewhere where you had two managers that had very different ways of doing things? And or if early on in your working career, you work in some retail. I worked at a sporting goods store. I worked at Old Navy. I worked some places, and it was like we like these managers. This manager, I worked at a bank too. We had multiple managers, and they would do things differently, right? But ultimately, all these places still have a general manager, one person who's in charge who has final say. Because if you have two people that have equal say, meaning, I should say not equal say, but equal rights to make those moves and to make the decision for the company. Well, if one wants to go this way and one wants to go this way, you're going to split the company apart. You're going to split your employees. Some of them are going to want to follow you and some of them are going to want to follow over here. You can't have two general managers. I mean, think about a sports team. Can you have two general managers on a sports team? No. All right. I mean, I'm a Seahawks guy, less so over the recent years, just because I've gotten less into football. I haven't watched as much. That's a whole other story. But this year, being 2024, they let go of Pete Carroll. And they said, they want to keep him on as a consultant or whatever. And you're like, I don't know how that's going to work. But when your general manager and your coaches don't see eye to eye, there's just a lot of things. You need people to be on the same page, but you also need somebody who has that final say. And so, you've got to have somebody who has that final word, because when there's a disagreement in your household, you have to have somebody who has the final authority. In the end, when a decision needs to be made and the buck has to stop somewhere, husbands, you can't be passing the buck. You need to be the one to step up and make a decision. God has ordained that it stops with the husband. Now, any good husband understands that we talk about these things with our wives, right? There are helpers, right? I mean, it's, again, we see these, and football is really the only thing that I follow, okay? But there's been multiple things, or this year, another really interesting thing was the Falcons gave a huge contract to Kirk Cousins. Like, I don't know what it was. I can't remember, $170 million or something stupid. And then with the 8th pick in the draft, they drafted Michael Penix from UW. And everyone's like, what? Why would they do that? Kirk Cousins didn't know about it, right? There was a lot of people in the organization that didn't know that's what was happening, right? They didn't communicate. And then they're trying to explain or talk to other, I don't know who knows what was going on, but you need the important people to understand and know what you're doing. Now, do you need to go tell your second string kicker what quarterback you're going to draft, or that you're going to draft? No. Second string kicker doesn't matter, but your starting quarterback kind of matters, right? And there was a lot of kickback from commentators and things about that. I really could care less about the Falcons, but I could care less about most football teams. But the point is, you need to be consulting with your teammates, the people. The general manager doesn't make these decisions on his own. He's consulting with the owner. He's consulting with the president, vice president. he's consulting with the coach usually. And that happened on another team. Oh, I can't remember who it was now, but and they brought in the former New Orleans coach. Can't remember his name now. Sean Payton. Oh, Russell Wilson. That's what it was with Denver. They brought in first. They brought in Russell Wilson. Then they brought in Sean Payton, and then Sean Payton and Russell Wilson didn't get along. Right? There's that communication, like talking about what are we trying to do. Okay. So in the same way, God brought our wives to help us. Okay. Now, men, don't tell your wives that I said this, but we don't know everything, right? We're not all knowing. We aren't God. God gave us wives to help us see a different perspective, to help us see the world in a different way, to see people in a different way. Okay? And to see decision making. What was a big decision? And our family, I'm from Seattle, and our family moved to the Knoxville, Tennessee area in 2021. And that was a huge decision. I mean, I didn't just come up and, hey, this is what we're doing. No, I talked to my wife first. We talked about it. We prayed about it. And we talked about some pros and cons and things. And then we talked to our boys about it and said, hey, we're thinking about this. What do you think? Right? And we included everybody in kind of processing through some of that. Our wives have valuable input, and we really should not neglect that. So, husband, how are you leading your home? Do you include your wife in decision making? Do you engage in conversation? Do you ever compromise? That's the loving like Christ. Christ sacrificed himself often. Besides the biggest sacrifice, but there were a lot of other things that he did we can see in Scripture. Do you ever yield and take her decision? Not out of spite, but just sometimes it's, all right, let's do it your way this time. Okay? That's what being a married, and sometimes it'll go good, sometimes it won't. And then you can assess after that. Well, what didn't go well here? What can we do better next time, right? You're a team. You have the final say, but you are a team and need to be working together. I'm going to move on to the next thing here because all these things really go together. Verse 25 here says, husbands, love your wives as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. He gave himself up. Right? So this is the same thing we saw in verse 2. And, what did Christ do? He sacrificed himself. And this is where I come up with those questions about compromise and yielding. You are not the one who knows all things. Your wife very well may have a better decision. And if you read through the Gospels, you're going to see how often Jesus sacrificed his own wants. And one of the things that comes up all the time in my head, like that I read, it hit me a certain way one time, is that there's a time when it says that he wanted to go and rest, and so he got in a boat to go across the water, and the people saw which way he was going, and they knew where he was going to go because they all knew these ports, and they ran around and met him. And they had been running pretty fast, but they met him on the other side. And when he saw them there, says he had compassion on them and served them, even though he was tired. Okay, Christ sacrificed himself more than just on the cross. And so if you want to know, though, what loving your wife looks like, when it says, love your wives as Christ loved the church, go read 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7. Consider the parable of the Good Samaritan. Right? I mean, if you're not familiar with that, just look it up. Okay? I think people forget that parable, the Good Samaritan, was told after Jesus said, the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if you're supposed to act that way towards your neighbor, how much more are you supposed to act that way towards your wife? Right? I mean, and again, I'll recap the story real quick. Basically, He says there's a Samaritan. Now, the Samaritans were people that the Jews really didn't like. They were considered half-bloods, or we'll say mudbloods, if you're a Harry Potter fan, mixed breed, half-bloods, because they were, it was Jews who had left the faith, I guess, but they were Jewish by ethnicity, and they married people that were not Jewish. And so the children were mixed. And that was the Samaritans. So the Jews hated them. Racism is not, well, what's what I'm looking for? Prejudice is not limited to race, skin color, or anything else. You can be prejudiced towards anybody. And so when Jesus uses the Samaritan as an example, that's what really throws everything for a loop. So there's a guy who has been beaten up and robbed and left for dead. And a Levite priest comes along, sees him, crosses the road, goes around him because I can't be near a dead body. He thought he was dead. Someone else comes, a rabbi comes, does the same thing, just steps over him or goes past him. And then a Samaritan comes along and sees him and bandages him up, puts him on his donkey, takes him to an inn, and he gives the innkeeper some money and he says, here, take care of him. I'm going to return, and when I do, I'll pay whatever is owed. Okay, and that's where Jesus says, who was this man's neighbor? Okay, and so how do you love your wife? Are you like the Good Samaritan, where you go out of your way to take care of her, even if you feel like she's your enemy right now? Like the Samaritan was an enemy to the Jew who was on the ground? Or were you more like one of the others who just steps aside, and tries to, I don't know. I don't want to. I want to avoid this. I'm not trying to do anything here, right? One of my favorite, another favorite passage I'll say that shows the character of Jesus is Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through 34. And it's just after the disciples learned of John the Baptist's beheading, and they buried his body. And this is what I just talked about here. So I'm getting out of order because I'm just getting ahead of myself. But they took the boat across. He was tired and whatnot. But that's in Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 34. So how do you respond when you're tired and frustrated and had a bad day at work? Do you yell? Do you get angry because dinner's not ready? Do you get even more frustrated with things? Or do you sacrifice your wants and needs and serve your family? Choosing to love a sinner as Christ loves the church is not an easy task. We do have it hard, men, but that is the calling that we have. We have the calling to love our wives as Christ loved the church, sacrificing ourselves, giving up of ourselves. And I don't know what that means for you. I don't know if that means giving up alcohol, giving up smoking, giving up your job and getting a different job, moving closer to her family. Maybe it means sitting down at the table for dinner on a regular basis. Maybe it means having coffee with her. I don't know. I mean, every wife is different, so I can't tell you that, right? But I think you know what it means to sacrifice yourself and show Christ to your wife. We'll move on for a minute here, though, into the next thing. We need to grow in understanding. So that first thing is our role as leaders and to love our wives. And now we need to grow in understanding. 1 Peter 3:7. Let me turn there real quick. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as fellow heirs of grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. We need to live with our wives in an understanding way and honor her so that our prayers may not be hindered. Did you catch that? Your prayer life might be hindered because you're not living with your wife with understanding, because you're not honoring her. So when you're praying about that promotion at work, or praying that God will help you with things, or whatever, maybe God's not answering your prayer because of the way you're treating your wife. I can't say that's exactly it. Okay, I'm not God. I don't have the Holy Spirit telling me all about your life. But Peter seems to think that could be a possibility. So let's unpack that just a bit. We make jokes all the time about how men don't understand women, right? There's truth there because the way we think and act is different. I mean, most men, we're like, fixers. If you start talking to us, we're going to tell you how to fix it, no matter what it is. But also, men tend to be more of the risk takers. Women tend to be more of the caretakers. Men tend to be more action oriented. Women tend to be more emotion oriented. And what I mean by that is, the fixers, like we want to fix things. Women want to make sure people feel all right, to take care, make sure there's peace. I think there's more women that are peacemakers probably. If someone comes to me with a problem, I think of how I can fix it, including my wife. She starts talking about something in my head. I'm like, okay, why are you telling me this? Do we need to fix it? Do I need to go do something? But no, if someone comes to my wife with a problem, she listens, right? Sometimes she wonders why they're telling her things, but she's not trying to fix their problem. Well, she's starting to more now because I've rubbed off on her too much after 20 plus years. But I can ask my wife a question and get all kinds of details that I didn't need or ask for, right? If you ask a guy a question, usually you get a short answer. Hey, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to go over to the range, do some shooting. You ask a woman, where are you going? Well, I ran out of oil, and so I was going to go to the store, but I knew since I was going on my way to the store and this other place on the way, I figured I'd just go ahead and stop by Starbucks and get some coffee. Then I'm going to go to the store and get oil, but I'm also probably going to have to get these other things, and then and then Jane called and she wanted to chat about You're like, okay, right, all right. And I don't respond that way anymore to my wife. For you men watching, that's what's happening in my brain, right? But I think we've all been there. There's comedians that talk about this, right? It's this, we know this. There is a hardwired difference that is generally true, okay, not always, between men and women. So we're different. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. And that comes back also to why we need to work together. Because the way that we think about it, men, is going to be different than the way our wives think about it. And so we need to get their perspective so that we can have a more complete answer to the problem or to the situation or to what we need to do. We need to seek to understand how our wife functions. What are her needs? There's a great book that can help clarify some of these things, that it's not, I won't say it's 100% biblically based, okay? I think you can derive some biblical attributes from it, but the book is called His Needs, Her Needs. And it talks about the 5 top needs that men typically have, the top 5 needs that women typically have. And so if you are totally clueless, read that book together and then talk about each chapter. Like, is this true for you? Also, the 5 love languages. And this is a really good one because it helps to understand, when you take your car in, if you're taking your car in to get the AC worked on, let's say, and then you get it back and they're like, yeah, we rotated your tires and we changed your oil and we did, and you're like, I didn't want all of that. I don't care about all of that. Oh, it was free. Don't worry about it. And you might just be like, oh, okay, I just changed the oil a week ago though, so I don't, I wish you would have asked me. Like other people, though, they're like, oh, that's so great. I'm so glad I don't have to do that now, right? And so there's different ways that we feel loved. So I think they have like encouraging words, gifts, service, things like that, right? Like I could care less if the kitchen is clean at night. I'd like it cleaned eventually, and I don't want to have to do it, you know. Um, but um, but my wife could almost care less if I do things for her. She wants words. She wants me to compliment her, to and say encouraging words to her, right? Well, I could care less about the kitchen being done. I do like other things being done, and I want the things that I want done. I want them to be done, right? And so I have to communicate that, and I could care less about encouraging words. I don't need her to say, "Oh, you're really great, honey. Oh, you did a good job." Da, 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 those are things I could care less. Um, and so that 5 love languages helps you to kind of verbalize the things that you feel and the way that you potentially feel loved. So you're going to live with your wife till one of you dies. All right. So the rest of your life or the rest of her life, one of the two. You have time. Take it. Right? Take the time to understand your wife. My mom passed away in 2020, and I believe that was, let's see, I was 40. I think my parents were together then like 43 years, I think, something like that. My in-laws last year celebrated their 50th anniversary. Okay. You potentially have 40 to 60 years with your spouse, with your wife. Okay. You have lots of time to figure this out, but you shouldn't wait like, oh, I'll figure it out later. Right now, I'm just going to do my thing. It's like, you need to be building. The more that you build and the more that you seek to understand, the better your marriage will be, the more fun you'll have, the happier you're going to be. The second thing here in this passage, though, in this 1 Peter 3, we're to show our wives honor. Isn't that interesting? Even though they're supposed to submit to us as the head of the household, what are we supposed to do? Show them honor. And ultimately, they're supposed to show everybody honor, right? That's why I say that head of household is just a role. You're not the king. You're not God, right? It's just the role that you're playing. And we all know good general managers understand and respect the players on their team. And by players on the team, I mean like in the workspace, right? And when they let you do your job because they know you do it well, and then they show appreciation for it, don't you enjoy that? In the same way, that's our role as head of the household. We're the general manager, right? We recognize our wives' strengths and allow them to do their strengths and without micromanaging. And then we're there to help them in their weaknesses, right? And so we show them honor. And the way that we can show our honor, it varies, right? My wife and I like to joke. I'm sarcastic. She's grown to be a little bit sarcastic at times, but I always joke about submission, right? Like, oh, you better submit, woman. And it's just a joke, or like at church, whatever. And I say something about submitting, and there's some women, they're like, my husband would never get away with saying that. And my wife has to say, it's just a joke. It's just a thing. But that's because she knows that I'm joking, and because I show her honor, because the way I've treated her throughout our marriage. But at the same time, she lovingly submits. And so I feel like we're accomplishing those aspects of these roles And it's been good, right? Now, so again, how you show honor is going to be different. And I think that's part of finding those love languages. How does your wife feel loved and appreciated? That's one way to honor her. Being able to have the best seat on the couch or the chair when watching a movie. Maybe that's where she'll feel honored, right? Um, having someone else bring you food. My wife loves getting breakfast in bed. If she doesn't have to get up, if I bring her coffee and breakfast in bed, she I tell you she's good. I'm good for the rest of the day. I can almost do no wrong. I tell you what. But what was it? Letting her have control of the TV remote, right? These are simple, kind of dumb things. They have no bearing on life, but they do, because if you're showing her honor in these ways, that has big bearing on your life. Okay. What about getting the last bit of brownie or the last bit of ice cream? Right? Don't you feel special when you're the last one to get that bit? Give her that honor. All right. Again, the last brownie, really, I mean, you're going to make another batch of brownies not too long, right? I mean, it's not a big thing, but we feel special when we get that last bit, right? What's the consequence of not doing these things in 1 Peter 3? Your prayers could be hindered, like I said before, right? Doesn't that seem pretty strong? Doesn't that seem pretty strong that if you do not live with your wife with understanding, your prayers are going to be hindered? Well, that's just how important it is to have a good marriage. That's God set this high standard for us as men, so high that our prayers possibly couldn't be hindered, right? If we're not living up to it. Now, does that mean that you have to be perfect? No. Okay, we know that. But you need to be trying. Are you trying? Okay, are you working towards that? So what is it? How do we accomplish this? How do we grow in our understanding of our wives, and how do we learn to be sacrificial in our love? How do we dwell with them or show them honor? Pray, obviously. Okay, you need the Holy Spirit to open you to show you the areas you need to change and to look at. Communicate. Ask her questions. There's another book called Now We're Talking. They have Now We're Talking parents and marriage and teens, or they have a bunch of things. And it has questions for you to ask your spouse. And you can go back and forth. If you got a road trip, grab that book, take turns asking and answering the questions. Okay? Tell her, don't be afraid though, but tell her that you're trying to change. Communicate that. Let her know I'm trying to change and I want to do these things. That's why I want to sit down and communicate and talk about this. Those books I mentioned before, the 5 love languages, his needs, her needs, sit down and read those together. Remember though, just because you feel a human need doesn't always mean it's going to be 100% satisfied. Okay? One of the needs I think that we as husbands feel is the need to be respected. And wives are told in 1 Peter to respect your husband. Okay. But just because we feel that doesn't mean it's always going to be 100% satisfied. Okay. Your spouse's job is not to satisfy you 100%. 100% of the way, 100% of the time. They're still human and they're going to come up short. But it gives us something to strive for. If you're struggling with these things, find a mentor. Find a mature Christian who's been married a long time and talk with them. Every day, remind yourself of the actions you're going to take. Write them down. Write down these actions and then just do it. Don't let your mind be corrupted by what Satan wants. Take these things and each day say, I am going to do this. Because it will happen. You'll think, I'm going to tell my wife that she looks nice today. And then she's not around and she's moving here and there, and then you're going to get busy, and then you forget about it. Okay? Write it down. Do it. Now, there's a big caveat to all of this. What if your wife is not living a Christ-like life? What if she's not a Christian? What if she's walked away from the faith? She's rude, she's mean, she's bitter, and will barely talk to you. Well, let's consider what 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2 have to say. Come on. Oh my goodness. Sorry. 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. So, in this passage, it's talking to wives, but ultimately, I think this is talking to both of us. The idea here, though, is that if you have an unbelieving spouse, you have somebody who's not wanting to follow Christ, when you do what you're supposed to be doing, it may very well draw them into Christ. I'm not saying that's going to happen for sure, okay? I'm not God. Again, I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that 1 Peter says, wives, you may draw your unbelieving husband into the Lord by acting in an appropriate way, by being respectful to your husband and by your chaste behavior, meaning you're not sleeping around with other women. Okay? As you focus on what you are supposed to be doing, it may very well draw your life or your wife into a relationship with God that she needs. I'm not saying it's going to be easy or any of these things will be easy. I'm not saying it'll be quick. But if you choose to love, honor, and understand your wife, you will experience more peace and happiness in your life. To quote the immortal Red Green, remember, I'm pulling for you. We're all in this together.